Here we go. The worst PC character archetype. This is from a player. Currently playing with someone that joined halfway through our campaign. He instantly decided to go the lone wolf, I don't need any of you archetype. And yeah, he decided to go racist as well. I don't mind the ignorant, posh upper class that appears to high end above everyone else. But what I enjoy when people go that route is the character development and find out, hey, maybe other people with different upbringings aren't so bad. This dude, however, calls our half-orc a green-skinned savage and our tabaxi a freak. Nothing else, no name, just that, and we all just let it slide. He started off saying his character has choice feelings towards orcs, and I'm like, oh, maybe he doesn't like them because a group of them murder his family, but no, it's just because he's a human and they're not. He goes off into the night, doesn't sleep at our home base in the city, literally spends his actual gold nightly to be away from the group. Also, he gatekeeps every piece of information he finds out. I'm hoping we'll get some character development later, but I think a racist with no friends decided to play a racist with no friends in D&D. He always goes on about his previous group and how much they sucked and why he left it, and apparently everyone else in his world doesn't play D&D the way he wants to play it. He decided to go a warlock cross-class paladin, just a power game, and when he tries to roleplay, he speaks in his regular voice and then gets offended when people don't understand it, if he's talking in character or not. We have 2 other players that don't do a voice for their character and don't get offended because, we don't know when you're talking to yourself or when you're talking as your character. It's obvious when we roleplay because we do a voice. The game is online and we all met virtually because we wanted to find a game on a consistent basis. Everyone is playing to play D&D, and this dude clearly loves the game but hates the fact that you need other individuals to play it. Now that my rant is over, has anybody else had a similar PC like this? And what other weird character archetypes have you come across? Lone Wolf is a non-starter unless it's a one-player game. Exactly. Thank you, Ooze. That is exactly right. Lone Wolf is not the type of character you want to play in Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons is a cooperative storytelling adventure game, right? You need to be able to act and interact with the other players in your group. You can be brooding, you can, not like all of the party, but accept that you have to go along with them for certain reasons. Those kinds of things are okay, but you can't just expect to do everything by yourself because the other players and the other characters in the party will just completely ignore you, and when they do that, you'll probably end up dying. Or you'll not have fun because the game's about interacting with other people. DM hates players is a huge ass with the rules. Very recent. Ran a campaign with 2 GMs, and goddamn, this was the worst GM I've seen in so long, and one GM was absolute dog shit. First warning sign. The GM power trips like all hell. They refer to themselves as God of the game, and when they're told a rule that works in a scenario or explained how certain things work, they get mad and make their own rule out of nowhere. This GM was horrible with the rules to the point where they didn't even know what a saving throw was, despite this not being their first campaign. This happened a lot. Second warning sign. The GM is super controlling. There are so many examples to name, so I'll just go through some notable ones. Had characters' entire fates planned out, including unavoidable death. Commonly took over as God and had the party go places they wanted them to go by force, despite lacking planning. Forced people to RP exactly how they wanted, revealing character details to the party, using the character's voice, and never speaking out of character. Chose to not allow players to pick their race or class upon death. Yes, this isn't even a joke. If a character died, the DM would make them a new one. When this was revealed and players requested races, they went as far as to tell them they'd do the exact opposite. Nerfed abilities and spells on the spot if it did something they didn't want it to do. For example, telepathic speech being noticed by anyone with a semblance of magic talent. Detect magic not finding schools of magic. Create water not being allowed to be used. Dissonant whispers doing less damage than a single spear stab. Rolled max damage on the 2 guards while twinning. Neither died. And more. Took pretty much all suggestions as insults. Rudely blew off others when trying to suggest a rule or recommendation, etc. And even more of this. Third warning sign. Demanding players have certain IRL items and such. No digital dice allowed. No online sheets allowed. You have to have mother effing candles for ambience. You have to have a webcam. Last warning sign. Deep hatred for spellcasters. Wizards could only pick spells from their school. Spells within melee range proc opportunity attacks. Pretty much every area could entirely negate magic. Prison had anti-magic. Entire city had anti-magic. This one disease sped up when magic was used. And then we're all back-to-back plot points. Oh my god, okay. But when their magic NPCs use it, they can pretty much do anything with ease despite being like a random herbalist in a town in the desert. None of these things were established prior to the campaign, and the majority of the players were brand new to D&D. This was their introduction to the game. Like, my first DM wasn't a shining example, but he at least had a good grips on the rules. This DM is just horrible. I feel so bad for the other players. We already read it, but TLDR, extreme railroading, extremely stubborn, very bad understanding the rules, super controlling. DM. Left some creeps behind. This is from a player. This was like 7 or 8 years ago roughly, but I realized I hadn't posted it here. At this point, I had played D&D for 2 to 3 years, most of that experience as a DM. My fiance and I had just moved to a new neighborhood, and I thought it would be fun to join a local D&D group. I found a local friendly gaming store not too far, called in and found out the owner/manager and some others have a weekly D&D party with a spot open. They were already a few levels into Out of the Abyss, but the DM was cool with me joining. The party was myself, early 20s, too similar in age to me, then the DM, 60s, and his friend in his 40s to 50s. I'm trying not to be ageist, but every single problem came from the older two. I wonder why. The session I was being introduced, it was framed to me as a classic rescue the new member situation, with my character tied up in a sack. But the party spent 3 hours of gameplay talking, planning, and exploring, and doing an unrelated combat. Finally, the second combat came around, and finally my character was freed with like 30 minutes of gameplay left to the session. I still don't understand why the DM didn't plan for me to arrive sooner in the session. Number 2, we had one woman in the group, and I, a man, was also playing a woman. So we had 2 female characters. Both of the older guys would make minor sexist and sexual comments about our characters. Things like emphasizing how they looked in their outfits, trying to hook up with them, etc. I chalked up to boomers who didn't know much beyond this kind of talk. Number 3, my character's hair fell out entirely because of a bad wild magic surge in the Underdark. This was fun, and it would have been a neat emotional obstacle for my character to overcome, but instead, they, you know who I mean, made jokes about how my character wasn't a woman anymore, or would need to find a fantasy wig, and keep making Sinead O'Connor jokes, which not only am I too young to reference, but Googling later told me it was a shitty thing to meme about. This doesn't include how the DM was consistently underprepared, which I mean, he's running a store, I get it, but why DM then? He always had to look stuff up, sometimes taking, with no exaggeration, up to 30 minutes. I was already feeling like quitting because of the above behavior, and the session I was doing a one last chance. The final straw broke. We were in a big battle, the most deadly we had faced. A Medusa with a small army of stone soldiers. Most of the party had fallen, and the party fighter had already dipped out to run. It felt like we were on the edge of a TPK. My wizard was at the edge of the room, the choice of going in, trying one last move, or GTFO and survive. I decided to go back in, and ended up being turned to stone. We won the battle though. After some looting, came the moment for the surviving members to decide what to do about the ones that had died, and myself turned to stone. Instead of a sad decision, the older guy said his character felt mine up while she was turned to stone. I was pissed. This was my first character death, and in a moment that should have been heroic and sad, this guy was being an absolute f***ing creep. I told him, I'm done. I'm no longer sitting through this kind of shit. I've got my stuff. I left. I heard the DM calling for the end of the session while I left. This really sucks, man. This is not okay at all. That is not how one does lay on hands. Plus, lay on hands wouldn't cure being petrified. Player leaves in the middle of the first session. This is from a dungeon master. This happened a few weeks ago after the first combat in a homebrew campaign I'm currently running, and honestly, just left me completely bewildered. For reference, the cast was a human fighter. Why are the fighters always human? Tabaxi druid and a tiefling bard. TLDR, fighter gets upset and leaves the session right after the first combat because it should have been a TPK, despite the fact that he refused to RP to proceed to the fight. Even then, it was clear it wasn't going to be a TPK, and when he proceeded to try and poach one of his remaining players at the end of the session, I got really upset. Since then, I made an NPC based on his character, and the players hate him. Sessions are played over Discord using Roll20. We were also meant to have another player as a rogue, but they were on a no-show. Haven't given me any reasons as to why they didn't show, just completely ghosted. I guess they went rogue. Sorry for making you read that. That's okay, I don't mind reading puns. Regardless, everyone else showed and I still wanted to run a session. To start things, I had the characters meet up, working with them so we could do a creative introduction for the characters. The fighter and the bard worked out through an RP channel that the bard got arrested by the fighter. They were a soldier, and I worked with them to have them as a guard for the town that they were starting in, after making trouble at the tavern the night before. Druid hadn't been as active in the Discord, however, so basically I just asked what he wanted his character to be doing. Druid told me he was walking down the road, looking weary and hungry. After telling me this, I was about to get him introduced to the party when the first problem came up. The fighter rudely interrupted me as I was trying to do this, saying, "Can I talk?" Sure, that doesn't seem rude, but it was more the tone he said it, like very aggressively. Then he continued to make his suggestions as to what the druid could do, but I felt like he wasn't really vibing, and he just kind of didn't say much, so I moved things forward. Fighter and bard were walking out of the guardhouse after the fighter had released the bard, so I thought I could quickly get the druid introduced and able to start interacting. We had a fun little time where the bard thought the druid was an oversized cat and was like, "Here, kitty, kitty," while offering food. Cue the bard being surprised when the druid starts talking. I continued on and properly started off the session with the first encounter, narrating that they were walking towards the town center when they ran into this guy dressed in an orange tunic. He introduces himself as the town's tour guide, and after some RP, mentions that they should see a local wizard who usually always needs help with something. The guide offers to lead them there, and they follow. And out comes a girl with dragon scales. And I explain that they recognize she's actually a sorcerer, not a wizard. Cue some more RP before a massive rock suddenly bursts out of the doorway, sending the little wizard flying 100 feet into the air. Then the rocks start moving. Roll initiative. The combat is brief, however, as a massive rock creature just books it into the nearby forest. The fighter did attempt to fight it, however, getting knocked over in the process, taking 1d4 damage, but heavy armor mastery completely mitigated it. Nice. They then noticed the wizard still up in the sky. "She's still up there?" was asked. Then I narrated that she was falling slowly, swaying like a feather before landing gently on the ground. Cued some more RP, and the wizard gives them a quest to go east to a place called the Mistfields, aptly named because it's always covered in mist, to bring back some monsters, preferably alive, for research purposes, of course. It's made pretty clear that the Mistfields are to the east, and the guide offers to take them there. He starts walking off by himself, and they choose to just let him go. But that's fine. While working their way through the mist, they run into the body of a guide. Dead. Degenerates that they are, chose to loot him. I'm laughing and having a great time. That's pretty funny, actually. Loot the guide that they just let wander off and die. While not completely going away, the mist does start to clear up, eventually increasing their visibility to about 60 feet. And they came across an area sheltered by low, sloping cliffs. After spotting some people standing over a body on the ground, they choose to investigate. Druid decides to be sneaky and climbs up onto the cliff to spy. It seems like they're investigating the body on the ground and they're unsure what happened. Druid continues sneaking but fails one of the stealth checks. Bard quickly comes up with the idea to cast thaumaturgy, create a sound somewhere else to help, which I thought was a great idea. I allow the druid to make another check. Success! Sound does catch the attention and the NPC's dog runs after it. Then, out of nowhere, Fighter decides to approach the NPCs, telling both the others to basically shut up and hold position. After some questioning, he asks the NPCs to drop their weapons, but they refuse. I don't call for persuasion check, as there's a very good reason they wouldn't drop their weapons. Of course, the only logical thing for the fighter to do is draw their weapon. Okay. The NPCs didn't want to fight, however, and I made this clear. To be honest, I was actually expecting at least an insight check to see if the truth could be determined, but fighter is committed to doing what they do best, I guess. So now I'm scrambling while everyone is rolling initiative because this is not meant to be a fight that I had planned. I had to quickly adapt. During combat, a fighter basically starts complaining about how the leader was too strong and there were too many for just the 3 of them, and there had been another 2 NPCs they hadn't even run into yet. I couldn't really say anything though, as I had to keep combat moving along and didn't want to get into an argument. Anyway, everything turns out fine. Druid is downed, but I told him the NPCs were attacking non-lethally, so he didn't have to make any death saves, and I have a homebrewing rule that players can still do stuff where they're downed. I find it lame that once players are out, they just have to wait 5 minutes to roll a death save, or just skip their turn. So the druid chose to take on some exhaustion so he could make one last-ditch attack, which was enough to take out the leader NPC. At this point, the fighter just starts looting. So I state what stuff the NPCs have on them, and we take like a 15-20 minute break. After I get back, the fighter is gone from the voice chat, and I find a single message from him in the main channel saying that he wanted to try and wait until the end of the session, but instead he just left. Beyond that, nothing else. No reason to actually why he left, but naturally, I could guess. Not gonna lie, I was actually relieved. Felt like there were instances where he would make a big deal out of something that honestly just didn't matter, and the constant remarks during combat that just really soured my opinion of him. Had he not left, I don't think I would have kept him around because, you know. I decided to put a pin in the session in any case, but we still talked a bit afterwards. I asked the remaining 2 what they had thought of everything so far, and they told me that both of them were having fun and can't wait for the next session. Probably especially so since I had cut this session short. Afterwards, I decided to send the fighter a polite message, inquiring as to what he didn't like about the session, as I always appreciate feedback, which we can always improve as DMs, of course, which is great advice. I got a little bit out of it at least. Pretty much, he just accused me of having too many red flags, but he didn't like the way I ran things, which is fine. Some styles don't fit everybody. But he said it in a way that basically boiled down to, you're doing it wrong. I felt like I was giving the players plenty of opportunity to do their own thing, and did in fact ask what they would like to do multiple times. There were some parts I genuinely had to improv, and naturally, as players will do, the unexpected, but I feel like that should be reason enough to believe that I'm giving them agency. Nevertheless, he proceeds to tell me I didn't ask them what they wanted to do, which I actually asked them multiple times now, so I don't believe him. That I was making stuff up turn to turn during combat just to punish them, that everything just felt made up on the spot, that I obviously wasn't interested in cooperative storytelling, and that railroading seemed like my entire style. I thought maybe he'd be nice, but the whole message was rude and instantly antagonistic. I did want more info though, again for DM improvement, so in another polite message, I first acknowledged my genuine faults and apologized for it, then asked, what about the combat scene punishing? I may as well have not asked though. He just told me the combat was absurd. There were too many enemies, that the party all should have died, and they would have if he hadn't picked a specific feat. Pointed out the damage he would have took without the feat, actually calculated the damage, and that it was exactly equal to his HP. Then he tells me attacking the druid was also a red flag because he had lower HP and lower AC. So it would have only been druid and bard, and because of that, it definitely would have been a TPK. I have never had a player leave or get upset over a potential for a TPK, and what's even more baffling is that he was upset because he made a good character build? I thought about it too, and even without the feat, it wouldn't have been a TPK, and even if they were all down, I clearly stated that the NPCs had been attacking non-lethally. At worst, it might have been a TPKO, but I sincerely doubt it. I soon found out that he also told one of the other players afterwards that he felt sorry for them, that this is their first time experiencing D&D, was with a DM like him, and they even tried to invite them away from my game. The worst thing about this was that he told me prior that he felt sorry for some players that have really bad experiences with their first time around D&D, yet this player has really enjoyed what they've done so far. Like I said in the beginning, however, it's been 2 weeks since I played with this absolute clown. Since then, I've found another 3 amazing players who have just been an absolute delight to play with both the druid and the bard being bona fide babes. And to make something positive out of the experience, I made an NPC based on the fighter's character doing the exact same thing to those players that he did to the NPCs. They absolutely hate this guy, so I guess I inadvertently made a really good antagonist. Rogue's still rogue though. The DM changes the story halfway through. This is from a player. We played in a short 10-session mini-campaign that followed a group of townsfolk trying to solve a murder of their best friend. There were 5 players in all: the rogue, the bard, the fighter, the cleric, and the monk. We played the first 4 and got very little in clues. We had narrowed down the suspect list and possible motives. The rogue was a police detective who was leading the chase. He was also the DM's best friend. It was pretty clear that this story had been tailored to fit this player, as everything about it fit into that player's backstory so well. The villain even started to hunt the rogue exclusively. We get to the entrance of a possible hideout and the end of the session there. Everybody walks away happy, and a few of us hang out afterwards. The DM asks the cleric what her plan is for the next session. She tells him that she's going to use the stuff that she learned while searching the library against him and use the spell scroll she brought earlier to stop the incantation if he tries it. DM said, "Awesome, that'll be so cool," and moved to the fighter, asking what he thought. The fighter said they had planned to sneak in and track the villain if he could. Then the DM asked the bard, me, what my thoughts were on the session and what I think will happen. I tell him I was excited to finally meet this person face to face and potentially avenge my colleague, bandmate, the best friend we all had in common. I said that I thought it possible that the killer was the best friend himself and that he had gotten away with murdering someone else and making it seem like him. The DM's smile faded for a second before saying, "Oh, that would have been awesome." Why'd you give anything away? The PC playing the rogue walked into the kitchen and the DM suddenly got up and followed. The next week we sat down for the session. Fighter goes off to hide and spy, and the rest of us head in the front door. The fighter gets the table to himself for about 10 minutes as the DM asks us all to leave so they can do whatever the fighter is doing in private. After we come back, we begin searching around, finding nothing, until finally we see the fighter's body drop from the rafters. Oh no. I looked over to the fighter and saw an angry look on his face. I hadn't even been paying attention to it before, but he was clearly pissed. Oh yes. The villain appeared in a plague doctor mask and began a speech about temptation and risk and finally talking about inevitability. The rogue asked some questions and we started to try to see what happened and what his plan was. We looked around and saw the incantation spell was almost ready. When we realized this, the villain said, "You brought me a final piece, the victim's blood." The floor began to glow and he began to start a spell. The cleric pulled out the spell scroll she had bought and used it. The spell didn't fade, but we heard the whir of something. Then the spell scroll exploded and knocked out the cleric. The monk and I, the bard, as well as the rogue, were all that was left. We started to fight and it seemed like it was just not going down. He barely took damage. He had weapons and traps everywhere. It would have been fine if not for we went into spaces where the villain had been and it clearly didn't affect him. The rogue gets stabbed and a whisper in his ear and he leaves us to heal ourselves. The rogue and the DM were extremely friendly up until this point, and it was here where I saw the shift. He was clearly frustrated as well. The session ends and we walk away. The fighter was not allowed to come back. The DM explained that because it was in the later half of the story and it was meant to be short, it wouldn't work to bring in a new character. Aren't they only like 4 sessions in out of 10? Or was it just the first 4 sessions had very little clues? So they're like the 5th session in maybe? That seems kind of dumb. Skip to the ending and we get the reveal. The killer is none other than some random guy from the rogue's backstory. Didn't connect to anything that we had learned about him before. We had no clues pointing to him. We didn't even know who he was. The session ends with only the final battle left. We walk away, and as I'm walking down the street, I get a text from the rogue. We don't really know each other outside of the game, but I had his number from the group chat. I text back, and he says he wants to talk with everybody about the DM. We get on a call and talk. It was clear we all had the same thoughts. We knew that he had used what we had said against us, making our characters lose by having our plans fail because of the story. That was when the rogue tells us that the DM asked him a bunch of questions about who he thought it could be. The DM had mentioned my crazy idea and that the rogue compiled the clues to meet the same conclusion. Apparently the whisper that the DM had made to the player during combat was a comment about how it was funny that he could think the killer was his dead best friend. Guess you're just as dumb as the rest of them. Oh man. The rogue pulled the DM aside after that and commented on the impossibility of him knowing what he was thinking. DM said, I know, scary, right? He's inside your head. He knows your next step. We ended the combat and killed him, but like a bad 80s horror movie, it was clear there was a chance for return. I haven't played with that DM since.